Two men spent 26 months planning a bank robbery. 26 months. That is longer than most people stay at a job, longer than some marriages last, longer than some federal investigations run before they even make an arrest. They cased the target bank 47 times, 47 documented visits over more than 2 years. They mapped every camera. They logged the shift schedules. They tracked when the armored truck arrived on Fridays. They timed the security guard's bathroom breaks, not once, but repeatedly, across multiple weeks to establish a pattern. They bought the getaway vehicle with cash, different state, a private seller, no paper trail back to either of them. They used prepaid phones for coordination. They practiced the whole operation with stopwatches in an empty warehouse. Entry, floor control, vault access, exit. They drilled it until the timing was mechanical. 11 minutes after they walked through the front door, they were in handcuffs on the sidewalk. That gap between 26 months of preparation and 11 minutes of catastrophic failure is what this case is really about. Not the robbery itself, not the planning. That gap is where the truth lives. And the truth, as it almost always does in this work, tells you something the official version never bothers to say out loud. My name is Marcus Cole. I spent 8 years with NYPD at Manhattan North, then 20 years working unsolved homicides with the Chicago Task Force. I retired in 2019. What I do now is look at cases the way I always looked at them, from the evidence outward, not from the conclusion backward. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now and drop a comment below. Tell me what you already know about heist cases. Tell me what you think went wrong. I want to hear it, because what I am about to walk you through is not a story about two criminals who were stupid. That is the easy version. That is the version that lets everyone feel comfortable. The version that says, well, of course they got caught. Criminals always get caught. The system works. I've spent 4 decades watching the system, and I will tell you plainly, the system does not always work. In this case, it did, but not for the reasons the headline suggests. Let me start at the beginning, not the day of the robbery. The beginning. It starts, as it often does in cases like this, with a grievance and an idea. Two men, I will call them Subject 1 and Subject 2 for purposes of this account, as their identities and case details are drawn from documented patterns in federal bank robbery case files, had a plan. Not a crude plan, not the kind of plan most bank robbers have, which is essentially no plan at all. The FBI's own data shows that the majority of bank robberies are impulsive, low preparation crimes. Someone walks in, passes a note, takes what they can grab from the teller's drawer, and runs. Those cases clear fast. Those people are caught within hours or days in most instances. This was different. These two men had patience. They had discipline. And for a long time, what they had looked like it might actually be enough. The surveillance phase alone took the better part of a year. They approached the target location, a regional bank branch in a mid-sized city, the kind of branch that handles significant Friday cash loads for local businesses, as if they were conducting a professional security audit. They came at different times of day, different days of the week. They sat in parked cars. They walked past on foot. They entered the lobby on the pretense of using the ATM. They noted which tellers worked which windows. They identified the branch manager by name and shift. They photographed the parking lot from multiple angles using a camera that looked like a phone, because it was a phone. Now, I want you to understand what 47 visits actually means in terms of commitment. That is not a casual operation. That is a second job. That is early mornings and long drives and detailed notes kept in notebooks that were later found in a storage box under a false floor in a closet. 47 visits across 14 months means an average of more than 3 visits per month, sustained across more than a year, with enough discipline to not vary the behavior in any way that would attract suspicion. Bank staff began to recognize Subject 1's face without consciously registering him as a threat. He was just a man they had seen before. That is exactly what he was counting on. By month 8, they had what amounted to an operational dossier. The guard, a contract security employee, not an armed officer, arrived at 7:50 in the morning, and took a bathroom break between 10:15 and 10:30 most days. The Friday cash delivery came between 9 and 9:30. By 11, the vault will be restocked and the tellers will be processing the morning's business customer deposits. That window between 10:20 and 10:40 was when the branch was at its most vulnerable. Reduced foot traffic, guard predictably occupied, vault accessible but not yet cycled for the afternoon. They identified that window in month 8. They spent the next 18 months preparing to exploit it. The role assignments were specific. Subject 1 would control the floor. Subject 2 would manage the vault interaction with the branch manager. They practiced verbal commands. They studied floor plans, not the actual blueprints, but they reconstructed the layout from memory across multiple visits, drawing it by hand and refining the sketch over time. They sourced their equipment through channels designed to create no direct link. The zip ties they planned to use for restraints came from 3 different hardware stores in 3 different towns, purchased months apart. The bags for the cash were generic duffel bags bought at a sporting goods chain with cash. The gloves came from a construction supply warehouse. The vehicle was the piece they were most proud of, a late model pickup truck purchased from a private seller 6 states away. The seller was paid cash. No registration transfer was initiated. The truck sat in a rented storage unit for 5 months before the operation. The unit was rented under a false name with a forged state ID. The payment was cash, prepaid monthly. They also planned their exit route with the same rigor they applied to entry. 3 routes out of the city: primary, secondary, tertiary. Each route was driven multiple times. Traffic patterns logged at the same time of day, Friday mornings, because that was the operational window. They identified a location 42 miles from the bank where the truck would be abandoned, and a second vehicle, also purchased clean, also stored separately, would be waiting. The swap would take less than 4 minutes. After that, 2 men with a bag of cash will be in a different vehicle, on a different road, heading in a different direction. That was the theory. On paper, and I mean that literally, on the paper they left behind, which we will get to, this looked airtight. These were not reckless men. They were, by every operational measure, careful men. And carefulness, when it is applied to the wrong framework, is its own kind of trap. They walked into that bank at 10:18 on a Friday morning. They had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. Subject 1 moved to the center of the lobby floor. Subject 2 went directly to the desk near the vault access door. The commands went out. Employees were directed to the floor. A customer near the door. There was one customer they had not accounted for, because that morning's timing was slightly off from the pattern, froze near the entrance. Subject 1 made a decision in that moment. He moved toward the customer to secure the perimeter, as they had discussed in their planning scenarios. That decision added approximately 45 seconds to the timeline. 45 seconds does not sound like much. In a carefully timed operation, 45 seconds is a different universe. The branch manager, a woman who had been through the bank's active threat training twice in the previous 3 years, did not panic. She did not reach for anything obvious. She did not make a sudden move. What she did was something so small, it was almost invisible. She shifted her left foot backward slightly, and with the heel of her shoe, she pressed the silent alarm trigger that had been installed beneath the carpet runner in front of the vault access door 18 months earlier as part of a security upgrade. That signal went out at 10:19 and 40 seconds. Local law enforcement received the alert at 10:20. The branch was 3 blocks from a substation. 2 units were already in the area, running a routine morning patrol. The first unit turned toward the branch at 10:21. Subject 2 reached the vault. The manager complied with the demand to open the outer door. She was cooperative. She was calm. She was doing everything right from their perspective. But she was also moving at a pace that was, deliberately, slightly slower than her normal speed. Not slow enough to provoke a response. Slow enough to cost time. Inside the vault, the cash bundles were preloaded with die packs. This is standard procedure at most branches, and it is publicly known that this is standard procedure. Subject 1 and Subject 2 knew about die packs. They had discussed die packs extensively in their planning. Their countermeasure was to examine each bundle before placing it in the bag. That examination, per their rehearsals, added 8 seconds per bundle. They had not rehearsed it with their hearts running at 160 beats per minute. Subject 2 grabbed 12 bundles without checking 4 of them. The die pack in bundle 9 was a pressure-activated unit. The moment it left the confines of the vault threshold and the air pressure differential engaged, the internal timer began its countdown. They exited the bank at 10:27 and 14 seconds. The first police unit turned the corner onto the block at 10:26 and 50 seconds. The officer saw 2 men in dark clothing exit the bank moving fast. The officer had the alert description: dark clothing, 2 subjects. He called it in and positioned the unit across the intersection. Subject 1 saw the patrol car. He veered right toward the alley where the truck was parked. Subject 2 followed. At 10:28, 3 seconds into the alley, Bundle 9 detonated. The dye, a bright permanent red-orange chemical compound, spread across Subject 2's jacket, the bag, and his right hand. It also made a sound, a sharp, distinct crack that echoed off the alley walls. The second patrol unit, responding to the alert, was entering the alley from the opposite end. 11 minutes and some seconds after entry, both subjects were face down on the asphalt. Now, here's where I want you to pay attention, because this is the part the headline skips. The investigation that followed was not simple. The arrest was simple. The investigation was something else. Law enforcement spent the next 4 months unwinding 26 months of preparation, and what they found was something that should change the way you think about criminal planning entirely. Every step of the preparation had left a mark. The surveillance visits to the bank, 47 of them, had been captured on the bank's own exterior cameras on at least 19 separate occasions. The investigators didn't need to prove those visits. The footage existed: faces, dates, timestamps. 19 instances of documented reconnaissance spread across 14 months. The subjects had varied their appearances, but not enough. Same bone structure, same gait. Gait analysis, which is now routinely used in federal prosecutions, identified Subject 1 across 6 separate visits with 92% certainty before any other evidence was applied. The prepaid phones were not as clean as they believed. The phones themselves generated no subscriber records, but every prepaid phone has an IMEI number. That number is logged by cellular towers whenever the phone is active, whether or not a call is placed. The tower data placed both phones in the vicinity of the bank on 15 of the 19 documented surveillance dates. It also placed both phones at the same location, an address in a residential neighborhood across the city, on 43 separate evenings over a 14-month period. That address was Subject 1's sister's house. He had never used a prepaid phone there for a call, but the phone had been in his pocket, and the tower had seen it. The storage unit rental under the false name unraveled within 72 hours of the arrest. The forged state ID used to rent the unit had been produced using a specific type of laminate material that the Secret Service, which handles document fraud, had flagged as part of a batch sourced from a counterfeiting operation out of a different state. The counterfeiter was already in custody. His records showed a sale, cash, but with a physical description of the buyer that matched Subject 2. The truck's paper trail ended at the private sale, as planned, but the truck itself had been driven, and driven vehicles leave records. Toll transponder readers capture license plates even when there is no transponder in the vehicle. Speed cameras log plates. A fuel purchase made with cash at a gas station 300 miles from the storage unit was captured on the station's internal security camera, which recorded the plate number automatically as part of its pump activation system. That footage placed the truck on a specific route on a specific date. That route, cross-referenced with cell tower data from both prepaid phones, established that both subjects had made the trip together. 26 months of careful work. 26 months of digital and physical evidence accumulating in systems they did not know were watching. I want to pause here for a moment on the notebooks. Because the notebooks matter. During the search of Subject 1's residence, investigators found a locked box. Inside that box were 7 composition notebooks, dated, organized, indexed. These were not random jottings. These were operational logs. Every surveillance visit documented. Times in, times out. Observations. Questions flagged for follow-up. Security vulnerabilities noted and rated on a scale of 1 to 5. Personnel descriptions. Vehicle descriptions for the parking lot. Notes on seasonal variation. The branch lobby had different foot traffic patterns in December than in July, and they had documented that. Those notebooks were, from an investigative standpoint, extraordinary. Federal prosecutors later described them as among the most detailed pre-crime documentation they had encountered in a bank robbery case. The irony, and there is always an irony in cases like this, is that the same discipline that made the planning so thorough also made the evidence so comprehensive. They had documented their own surveillance operation in enough detail to prove premeditation, conspiracy, and intent beyond any reasonable doubt. The notebooks alone would have been sufficient for conviction. Everything else was supporting material. There is a concept in investigative work that I spent 20 years applying. I call it the ledger. Every action has a cost and a record. Most people only think about the cost, what they spend, what they risk, what they stand to lose if caught. The record is the thing they forget. The record is not just what you leave behind intentionally. The record is what the world makes of you as you move through it. Tower pings, camera frames, toll readers, receipts that don't look like receipts. The human memory of a gas station clerk who remembers 2 men because one of them paid in all small bills and counted them twice. These 2 men were intelligent. I want to be clear about that because dismissing them is the wrong lesson. They were organized, patient, and operationally sophisticated by the standards of bank robbery cases I have seen documented across my career. Most bank robbers have a plan that lasts about 45 seconds. These men had a plan that lasted 26 months, and that is precisely what buried them. Here's the thing about intelligence applied to the wrong problem. These men were excellent at building a plan. They were poor at stress testing it against reality. They planned for the guard. They planned for the cameras. They planned for the cash tracking. They planned for a dozen variables they identified in advance. What they could not plan for was the variable they never saw. The branch manager's heel, the silent trigger, the 3-block proximity of a patrol unit, the 45 extra seconds burned on one unaccounted for customer. The plan was a model. The robbery was reality. Models and reality do not match. They never match. And the gap between them in this line of work is always measured in handcuffs. I have seen this pattern, and I mean this literally. I have seen it across documented case files, across testimony, across post-conviction analysis. I have seen this pattern play out in case after case. The more elaborate the preparation, the higher the confidence. The higher the confidence, the less tolerance for the unexpected. When something unexpected happens, the plan doesn't flex, the plan breaks. And when it breaks at the critical moment, 26 months of setup becomes 26 months of evidence. That is the gap. That is what this case is actually about, not the robbery. The gap between who you think you are when you are planning and who you actually are when it is real. The gap between the stopwatch in a warehouse and the heartbeat in a vault. The gap between the model and the moment. I want to say one more thing before I close this out, and it is something that does not make it into the headline. The branch manager in this case, the woman who pressed that alarm with her heel, she was asked about it afterward. She said she was not a hero. She said she was terrified. She said she pressed the alarm because her training said to press the alarm. And in that moment, training was the only thing running because everything else in her brain had shut down from fear. She went home and did not sleep for 3 days. She requested a transfer to a different branch. That request was granted. Her name does not appear in the case summary the way it should. It appears in a footnote after she made the decision that ended this case in 11 minutes, instead of however long it might have taken if that alarm had not gone out. I have spent a lot of years around case files. The footnotes are where the real story lives. Always. What is the most audacious heist you have ever heard of? Real case, documented, doesn't matter where in the world. Drop it in the comments below. I read everything. I respond to more than you might expect. If there is a case that deserves a closer look, your comment might be the reason it gets one. I am Marcus Cole. I spent 28 years looking at what the system produces and asking whether it produced the truth. Sometimes it does. This time, it did. But it did because a woman pressed a button with her heel and a patrol unit happened to be 3 blocks away. Not because the plan failed on its own, because the world refused to cooperate with the plan. That is what the 11 minutes was really about. Stay skeptical. Stay sharp. I will see you in the next case.